The gavel fell with the sound of a snapped bone. The board has voted. Carol Vance announced, her voice a placid, unyielding monolith in the stale air of the Pine Ridge Estates Community Clubhouse. 4-1. The violation is upheld. The fines totaling $2,500 as of today stand. Mr. Henderson, you are instructed to either remove the unapproved structure within 14 days or submit a new architectural plan that conforms to community standards. Next item on the agenda. David Henderson stood alone at the flimsy lectern, the warmth of humiliation creeping up his neck. The 5 board members sat behind a long folding table looking everywhere but at him. Carol, the HOA president, remained impassive, her posture impeccable, the serene mask of someone who held all the power. The small audience of homeowners, a dozen or so curious neighbors, shifted in their plastic chairs, their gazes a mixture of pity and a palpable relief that it wasn't them at the lectern. Madam President David began, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. He was an architect. Order and reason were the scaffolding of his world. This proceeding was a mockery of both. Under the state's Planned Community Act, the board is required to consider evidence. I have presented the county-issued building permit, the surveyor's report confirming the structure is entirely on my private lot, and an analysis showing that CC&R Section 8.4.2 is legally unenforceable due to vagueness. I must respectfully object to the ruling. Carol offered him a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was a brief, bloodless curve of her lips, a gesture of dismissal honed over a decade of running these meetings. Your objection is noted for the record, Mr. Henderson, as is your unique interpretation of the governing documents. However, your 5 minutes expired 3 minutes ago. Please take your seat. We have a budget review to conduct. He stood there for a beat longer, the sheaf of papers in his hand suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. He had walked in here armed with logic, precedent, and the law. He had laid out his case with the calm precision of a blueprint, believing that facts would prevail. But facts had no currency here. This wasn't a hearing. It was a ritual of public strangulation, and he was the guest of honor. He looked at the faces of the board members he had voted for, people he exchanged pleasantries with at the community mailbox. They were cowed, their expressions, blank slates of compliance. Carol ran the board, and by extension, she ran their lives. He retreated to his chair, the weight of their collective gaze pressing down on him. The fluorescent lights of the clubhouse hummed a flat, monotonous sound that seemed to mock the frantic pulse in his ears. The intent to place a lien. The final notice he'd received 3 days ago lay on the table in front of him. Its bold letters, a declaration of war. He had 30 days. 30 days before this fabricated violation became a legal claim against the home he had built with his own hands, the sanctuary he had created for his wife. Looking out the clubhouse window, he could just see the elegant cedar lines of the gazebo at the edge of his property. It was more than a structure. It was a promise. And Carol Vance was trying to tear it down board by board, using the very rules meant to hold their community together as her weapon. He now understood that this was never about the gazebo. It was about power. And he had just been publicly, procedurally, and utterly defeated. 6 weeks earlier, October 14th. The air held the crisp, clean scent of autumn. A cascade of golden maple leaves drifted down, blanketing the manicured lawns of Pine Ridge Estates in a temporary, glorious chaos. In the backyard of Lot 22, David Henderson tightened the final brass screw on the gazebo's cupola. He stepped back, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow, and admired his work. It was a simple, elegant octagon of cedar and glass nestled among the birch trees at the far edge of his property. It wasn't large or ostentatious, but it was perfect. The sliding glass door to the house opened, and Elena emerged wrapped in a thick cashmere shawl, despite the mild afternoon. Her steps were slow and deliberate, but her eyes when they met his were bright with a light he hadn't seen in months. "It's finished," she said, her voice a soft marvel. "It's finished," he confirmed, his heart swelling. She walked to the gazebo and ran a hand along the smooth cedar railing. A year ago, she would have bounded down the steps. But a brutal autoimmune disease, followed by an even more brutal course of treatment, had stolen her energy, leaving a fragile quiet in its wake. Elena, the sharpest litigator he had ever known, a woman who could command a courtroom with the force of her intellect, now measured her days in steps and spoonfuls. The gazebo was his answer to the sterile confines of the hospital rooms and the suffocating stillness of the house. It was a place for her to sit, to breathe fresh air, to watch the seasons turn, without being exposed to the elements. It was a sanctuary. "It's beautiful, David," she whispered, stepping inside. "Truly." He joined her on the built-in bench, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the play of light through the leaves. From this vantage point, they could see the gentle slope of the community's largest common area, a rolling green space dotted with mature oak trees that led down to a small placid pond. It was one of the reasons they'd bought this specific lot. "Think of all the reading you can do out here," David said. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. "I was thinking of all the briefs I won't have to read out here." She had taken an indefinite leave from the firm. Her mind was as sharp as ever, but the physical toll of a trial was simply too much. "Maybe I'll just watch the birds." It was a simple dream, but it was everything. As they sat, David's gaze drifted up the hill to the largest house on the cul-de-sac, the one with the sprawling deck and the immaculate tiered landscaping. Carol Vance's house. He saw a figure standing on the deck, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. It was Carol, holding a pair of binoculars to her eyes, pointed directly at them. At the gazebo, her expression was unreadable from this distance, but the stillness of her posture felt like an accusation. After a moment, she lowered the binoculars and went back inside. A faint unease prickled David's skin. He'd had all the necessary county permits. He was an architect. He followed codes to the letter. Still, he knew Pine Ridge was governed by a thick binder of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Later that evening, he pulled the heavy HOA binder from the shelf in his study. Elena sat across from him, sipping chamomile tea. Just being thorough, he said more to himself than to her. He flipped through the meticulously organized sections: fences, landscaping, exterior paint colors. He found the section on accessory structures. "Here it is," he said, running his finger down the page. "Maximum height, 10 feet. Check. Maximum footprint, 150 square feet. Check. Must be constructed of natural materials harmonious with the main dwelling. Cedar. Check." Then he saw another clause tucked away in the general provisions section. He took a pen and highlighted it. 8.4.2 Preservation of Aesthetic and View Corridors. All improvements on any private lot must be designed and situated so as to preserve the natural aesthetic and principal view corridors of the community, common areas as they exist at the time of the association's founding. "That seems intentionally vague," he murmured. "Natural aesthetic, principal view corridors. Those aren't defined anywhere in the document." Elena leaned over to read it. A flicker of the old litigator sparked in her eyes. "That's a classic poison pill clause, David. It's subjective enough that a board can interpret it to mean whatever they want it to mean. It's designed to be a weapon." She pointed to another section. "But what about this one?" He highlighted the clause she indicated. 5.1.1 Homeowner Property Rights. Subject to the provisions of this declaration, each owner shall have the exclusive right to use and enjoy his or her lot, including the right to construct, modify, and maintain improvements thereon, provided such actions comply with all applicable municipal codes and the specific enumerated restrictions contained herein. Specific and enumerated, Elena said softly. That's your shield. Legal precedent overwhelmingly favors specific restrictions over vague aesthetic clauses. You're fine. The gazebo is 100% compliant. David nodded, closing the binder. He felt reassured. They were on solid ground. Rules were rules after all. He looked out the window at the gazebo, its silhouette a gentle shadow against the darkening sky. It was a symbol of peace, of healing. He couldn't imagine anyone seeing it as a threat. A week later, the first shot was fired. It wasn't a cannon blast, but a quiet, insidious paper cut. It arrived not in the mailbox, but in his inbox with the subject line, Pine Ridge Estates HOA, courtesy notice. The email was from Pine Ridge Compliance, a generic address for the association's management company, Sterling Properties. The tone was blandly polite, the kind of corporate speak designed to convey authority without admitting aggression. Dear Mr. Henderson, this email serves as a courtesy reminder regarding the governing documents of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. It has come to the attention of the Board of Directors that a new, unapproved structure has been erected on your property at Lot 22. As you are surely aware, all exterior modifications, including accessory structures, require prior written approval from the Architectural Control Committee (ACC) to ensure compliance with community standards. Please submit an ACC application for the structure within 10 business days. Failure to do so may result in the issuance of a formal violation notice and the levying of fines as outlined in the association's enforcement policy. Thank you for your cooperation in maintaining the harmony and beauty of our community. Sincerely, Sterling Properties Management. David read it twice. Unapproved structure. He had the county permit. He'd followed the CC&Rs to the letter. This was a procedural ambush. They were ignoring the legality of the gazebo itself and attacking him for not having gone through their specific and, in his view, redundant approval process first. He spent the next day compiling his response. He was meticulous, attaching a PDF of the county permit, a copy of the surveyor's report, and a detailed letter explaining how the gazebo complied with every specific enumerated restriction in the CC&Rs. He politely pointed out that since the structure was fully compliant, the ACC's approval was a ministerial act that should be granted retroactively. He ended the email with a friendly offer to walk any member of the ACC or the board through the plans and the site. He hit send, feeling confident that this was a simple misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a bit of professional communication. The reply from Sterling Properties came 2 days later. It was a single sentence. Your submission has been received and will be reviewed by the ACC at their next scheduled meeting. No date for the meeting was given, no acknowledgement of the documents he'd sent, just a bureaucratic black hole. Then, on October 22nd, the other shoe dropped. He found the small green certified mail slip in his mailbox. His stomach tightened. Certified mail was never good news. He drove to the post office and signed for the letter, the pen feeling slick in his hand. Back in his car, he tore open the envelope from Sterling Properties. The single sheet of paper inside was cold and formal. Formal notice of violation. Year, date, October the 23rd. Property, Lot 22, 1287, Chestnut Lane. Homeowner, David Henderson. Violation, CC&R, 8.4.2, preservation of aesthetic and view corridors. Description, construction of an unapproved accessory structure gazebo, which obstructs the principal view corridor of the common area pond from the upper cul-de-sac. Required action. Remove the unapproved structure. Fine. A fine of $100 has been assessed to your account. This fine will continue to accrue at a rate of $25 per day until the violation is cured. You have the right to appeal this violation in writing to the Board of Directors within 14 days. The tracking number for the certified letter was printed neatly at the bottom. David stared at the words, a cold anger solidifying in his chest. They had completely ignored his compliance with the specific rules and were now wielding the vague subjective view corridor clause as a club. And the location they cited, the upper cul-de-sac, was where Carol Vance's house stood. This was no longer a misunderstanding. The polite mask had been removed. He saw the certified letter for what it was, a formal challenge, a declaration that the rules were whatever Carol Vance decided they were. This wasn't about a gazebo anymore. It was a fight. David's first instinct was to fight fire with fire, to draft a scathing legal rebuttal. But Elena, ever the strategist, put a calming hand on his arm. "Don't get angry," she advised, her voice quiet but firm as she read the violation notice. "Get documents. Follow their process to the letter. Let them be the ones to break the rules. Create a paper trail that a judge can follow." He took her advice. He spent the next 2 days crafting a formal appeal. It was a masterpiece of restrained logical argumentation. He cited Bar 5.1.1, the Homeowner Property Rights Clause. He included photographs taken from various points in the common area, demonstrating that the gazebo nestled among the trees had a negligible impact on any conceivable view. He again attached his permits and surveyor's report. Most importantly, he formally requested the minutes from the board meeting where his alleged violation was discussed and voted upon. He sent the appeal via certified mail return receipt, requested well within the 14-day window. The response was a wall of silence. Days turned into a week. He called the Sterling Properties office. The receptionist, a woman named Brenda, with a perpetually weary voice, would put him on hold, then come back with a non-answer. "The board is reviewing your appeal, Mr. Henderson. We'll be in touch." "When does the board meet?" David asked. "Meeting schedules are posted in accordance with the bylaws." She would recite a board mantra. "Can I speak with our property manager directly?" "Ms. Albright is in a meeting. She'll return your call." Ms. Albright never returned his calls. Emails sent to the Pine Ridge compliance address were met with an automated reply. "Your message has been received. A representative will respond within 3 to 5 business days." No representative ever did. He was being stonewalled expertly and systematically. It was clear the management company was not a neutral administrator, but an extension of Carol's will. They were paid by the HOA, which meant they answered to the board, which meant they answered to her. They were the bureaucratic moat around her castle. On October 29th, a second letter arrived, this time via regular mail. "Dear Mr. Henderson, this letter is to inform you that the Board of Directors has reviewed and denied your appeal regarding the violation of CC&R, Rule 8.4.2. Per the Association's enforcement policy, you are hereby summoned to a formal hearing before the Board. The hearing is scheduled for November 12th at 7:00 p.m. in the Community Clubhouse. You will be allotted 5 minutes to present your case. Please be advised that fines continue to accrue until the violation is cured. Your current balance is $775. They had denied his appeal without providing any reasoning, without furnishing the minutes he had requested. They were simply marching him along their preordained path to judgment. The 5-minute time limit was the final insult, a clear signal that they had no intention of hearing his case, only of being seen to have heard it. Frustrated, David decided to approach a board member directly. He saw Mark Renshaw, the board treasurer, getting his mail. Mark was a mild-mannered accountant who David had always found reasonable. "Mark, can I have a word?" David said, approaching him. Mark flinched, his eyes darting around as if he were afraid of being seen. "Hi, David. Look, I'm in a bit of a rush. This will just take a second. I just want to understand the board's reasoning on my appeal. The notice didn't give any—" Mark's face tightened. He lowered his voice. "Listen, David. I can't discuss board business outside of a meeting. It's against the bylaws." "Bylaws?" David was incredulous. "Mark, we're neighbors. I'm just trying to understand why a fully permitted structure is racking up thousands of dollars in fines over a vague clause that seems to only affect Carol's view." Mark took a step back, holding his mail like a shield. "Carol is just trying to uphold the standards that protect all of our property values. The view of the pond is a major selling point for this community. You have to see the bigger picture." He wouldn't meet David's eyes. "I have to go. My wife is waiting." He scurried away, leaving David standing by the mailboxes, the formal notice of hearing clutched in his hand. The message was clear. The board wouldn't help him. The management company was a fortress. He was completely locked out of the system. If he was going to fight this, he couldn't play by their corrupted rules any longer. He had to find his own way in. The hearing notice was a declaration of war, and David knew he needed better weapons. That night, sitting in his study with Elena, he felt the architect in him give way to the strategist. "They control the process," Elena said, her finger tracing the date on the notice. "So, you have to go outside their process. They have to follow state law whether they like it or not. The Planned Community Act guarantees you access to association records, all of them." "I already asked for the minutes from the meeting where they voted," David said. "They ignored me." "Then, you ask again," she said, her voice flinty. "This time you send a formal records request citing the specific state statute. You don't just ask for the minutes from that one meeting. You ask for everything. Board meeting minutes for the last 3 years. All financial records. All contracts with vendors. Everything." The next morning, David drafted the letter, a formal, legally precise request for access to all official records of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, citing chapter and verse of the state code. He sent it via certified mail to Sterling Properties, with a copy to each board member's home address. The law gave them 10 business days to comply. While he waited, he knew he needed an expert, someone who knew how to navigate the labyrinth of municipal and association governance. He found him through a statewide homeowner advocacy group. His name was Frank Muller. Frank was a retired county surveyor in his late 70s, a man whose cranky demeanor was a thin veneer over a fierce and joyful passion for procedural justice. He'd spent 40 years untangling property line disputes and easement law, and he regarded corrupt HOA boards with the special loathing a master gardener has for invasive weeds. They met in Frank's cluttered home office, which smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. Maps were tacked to every wall. "So the president is citing a view corridor clause, huh?" Frank grunted after David laid out the situation. He peered at the CC&R section David had brought. Classic, vague, subjective, and a bully's best friend. "Let me guess, she's got the management company in her pocket, and the rest of the board is terrified of her." "That about sums it up," David said. "All right," Frank said, leaning back in his creaky chair. "I'll help you. My fee is a bottle of decent bourbon if we win. And we're going to win." He delighted in the prospect. "Your records request was a good start. When you get those documents, you're not looking for a smoking gun. You're looking for patterns. Look at the financials. Who gets paid? How often are the contracts competitively bid? Specifically, look at landscaping and common area maintenance. That's where they usually hide the bodies." 10 days later, a heavy box arrived from Sterling Properties. It contained stacks of documents, meeting minutes, financial statements, vendor contracts. David and Frank spread them out on David's dining room table. At first, it was a tedious slog through boring budget reports and mundane maintenance discussions. But then, as Frank predicted, a pattern began to emerge. One company appeared again and again: Vantscape Landscaping and Design. Vantscape, David said. Any relation to Carol Vance? Let's find out, Frank muttered, typing the name into his computer. A few clicks later, he had the state's corporate filings. Well. The owner is listed as one Roger Vance, Carol's brother-in-law. The conflict of interest was blatant. But it got worse. David started flipping through the meeting minutes. He noticed something odd. In any minutes related to landscaping contracts, entire paragraphs were redacted, blacked out with a heavy marker. Votes on budget items for common area enhancements were often summarized in a single, uninformative line. Motion passed to approve landscaping proposal as presented. What are they hiding in there? David wondered aloud, holding a redacted page up to the light. The invoices from Vantscape were even more suspicious. They were consistently 15 to 20% higher than the bids from other companies, which were invariably rejected for vague reasons like not meeting community aesthetic standards. There were huge five-figure invoices for projects described with impenetrable jargon: bioswale remediation, perennial revitalization, hardscape alignment. This is corruption, plain and simple, Frank said, jabbing a finger at a $5,000 invoice. She's using association funds to enrich her family. The view corridor is just a pretext to get you out of the way of whatever she's planning. The fight had just become about much more than a gazebo. It was about embezzlement, cronyism, and the abuse of power. David now knew Carol had something to hide, but he still didn't have the irrefutable proof he needed to expose her. The redacted minutes were a locked door. He needed the key. The key, as it turned out, was not in the box of documents from the HOA. It was in a dusty, forgotten archive in the basement of the county recorder's office. "We're chasing the wrong ghost," Frank announced a few days later, slamming down the phone after another frustrating call with a state official. "We're trying to argue the meaning of her words aesthetic, view corridor. It's a swamp. We need to attack the foundation of her entire claim." "The foundation is CC&R 8.4.2, David said. "No," Frank corrected, a glint in his eye. "The foundation is the property itself, the legal description of the land. The HOA's community map is just a sales tool. The real story is always in the original plat map filed at the county recorder's office, when the subdivision was created." The next afternoon, they were in the musty, climate-controlled quiet of the county archives. A clerk wheeled out a massive rolled-up document tied with a faded ribbon. It was the original Mylar plat map for the Pine Ridge Estates subdivision, filed in 1988. They carefully unrolled the dusty, oversized document on a large table. The crisp, black lines drawn by a draftsman's hand 30 years ago told a story of legal certainty. There were property lines, utility easements, setback requirements, all rendered with mathematical precision. Frank's gnarled finger traced the lines of the development. "Okay, here's the main road. Here's the cul-de-sac. There's Carol's lot number 18, and here's your lot number 22. He then traced the large, irregular shape of the common area that sloped down between their properties. He spent a full minute examining every line, every notation within and around the lots. David held his breath. Finally, Frank looked up, a slow, triumphant grin spreading across his face. "It's not here," he said, his voice a low, satisfied rumble. "What's not here?" David asked, leaning closer. "The easement," Frank said, tapping the map decisively. "If there were a legally protected view corridor, it would have to be recorded as a scenic easement on the plat. It would be right here, a defined surveyed area crossing your property, restricting construction. But there's nothing. Not a line. Not a notation. It doesn't exist. He pulled another document from his briefcase, the original deed for David's lot, which he'd had the foresight to pull from the records as well. And it's not in your deed either. Or hers. I checked. The implication hit David like a physical blow. So her entire claim, the violation, the fines, is a complete and utter fabrication, Frank finished. She invented a legal restriction out of thin air, banking on the fact that no one would ever bother to check the primary source documents. The entire nature of the conflict shifted in that instant. The question was no longer, is David in violation? It was now a far more dangerous one. Why is Carol Vance, the president of the HOA, knowingly perpetuating a lie that could cost a homeowner his property? The redacted minutes and the inflated landscaping invoices suddenly snapped into sharp focus. She wasn't just trying to bully him. She was trying to clear a path. An unobstructed path. For what? Frank traced a line on the plat map from Carol's deck, across the corner of David's lot, where the gazebo now stood, and down to the common area pond. Whatever expensive common area enhancement she's planning with her brother-in-law's company, Frank surmised she wants a front row seat. Your gazebo is in her way, not in the community's way. Her way. David now had his smoking gun. Carol's case was built on a foundation of sand. But he also knew that revealing this truth would be seen not as a defense, but as a direct declaration of war against Carol herself. And a cornered animal he knew was the most dangerous kind. Carol Vance felt the ground shifting beneath her. David's formal records request, followed by his and Frank's conspicuous visit to the county recorder's office, a visit reported to her by a friendly clerk, had clearly unnerved her. She knew they were digging, and she retaliated not by attacking David directly, but by choosing a softer, more vulnerable target. Her target was Mrs. Gable. Eleanor Gable was an 82-year-old widow who had lived in Pine Ridge since the first houses were built. She lived on a fixed income in one of the community's smaller homes and spent most of her days tending to her immaculate garden. Her small patch of earth was a riot of color and whimsy, filled with flowers, bird baths, and a cheerful, slightly chipped collection of garden gnomes. She had been one of the first neighbors to bring David and Elena a welcome pie when they moved in. The violation notice arrived on Mrs. Gable's doorstep a week before David's scheduled hearing. It cited 3 separate infractions. 1. CC&R, Burger 7.2.1, unapproved lawn ornaments, garden gnomes, exceeding the maximum allowance of one decorative ornament. 2. CC&R, were 9.5.3, nuisance wind chimes, creating noise audible from neighboring properties. 3. ACC Guideline 12B, unnatural landscaping elements, pink flamingos, a single plastic flamingo that her grandson had given her as a joke. The total initial fine was $75 with daily penalties to follow. Mrs. Gable was devastated. She called David in tears, the violation notice trembling in her hand. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "I've had these gnomes for 20 years. No one has ever said a word." David knew exactly what this was. It was a message for him. Carol was demonstrating the reach of her power, showing him that his fight would have collateral damage. She was turning his principles into a liability for his friends. The next evening, as David was checking his mail, Carol's luxury sedan glided to a stop beside him. The tinted window lowered. "David," she said, her tone as smooth and cool as river stones, "I was so sorry to hear about Mrs. Gable's compliance issues. It's always a shame when good longtime residents get caught up in enforcement sweeps. The rules are the rules, of course." "There hasn't been an enforcement sweep in 5 years," Carol David said flatly. "You're targeting an elderly woman to send me a message." Carol's polite smile never wavered. I'm simply ensuring uniform application of the CC&Rs, something I'm sure a man of principle like you can appreciate. She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. You know, it's amazing how these things can sometimes be resolved. A gesture of community goodwill, for example. Sometimes, if a significant issue like an unapproved structure that impacts a major community asset were to be resolved voluntarily, the board might find it has the discretion to reevaluate less pressing compliance matters. The offer was as clear as it was vile. Drop the fight for your gazebo, and I'll call off the dogs on the helpless old woman. David was now faced with a terrible moral dilemma. His fight was based on principle, on the truth he had uncovered in the county archives. To back down now would be to validate Carol's corruption and lies. But to continue meant allowing Mrs. Gable, who could barely afford her property taxes, to be bled dry by accumulating fines over a collection of ceramic gnomes. He spent a sleepless night wrestling with the choice. He saw Mrs. Gable's tear-streaked face, the fear in her eyes. He saw the plat map, the undeniable proof of Carol's fraud. What was the point of winning a battle of principle if innocent people were harmed in the process? By morning, he had his answer. It wasn't a choice between his principles and protecting his friend. It was a chance to demonstrate the difference between his character and Carol's. He walked to Mrs. Gable's house and found her sadly packing her gnomes into a cardboard box. "Eleanor," he said gently, "leave them be." He took out his checkbook and wrote a check to the Pine Ridge Estates HOA for the full amount of her fines. In the memo line, he carefully wrote, "Payment for E. Gable Lot, 34 fines. Paid under protest." He then drove to the Sterling Properties office and hand-delivered the check with a formal letter. The letter stated that he was paying the fines on Mrs. Gable's behalf to prevent undue hardship on a senior resident, but that he was doing so under protest, reserving all rights to challenge the legitimacy of the violations themselves. He made sure to get a stamped, dated copy for his records. It was a small act, but a significant one. He had refused to let her be a pawn in Carol's game. He had absorbed the cost himself publicly and on the record. He had called Carol's bluff without sacrificing his principles. The act also had an unintended consequence. It was witnessed by one of the junior board members, who happened to be in the management office. The man said nothing, but the look of quiet respect in his eyes told David he had just gained a potential silent ally. The war was still on, but he had just won a crucial moral victory. The night of the annual homeowners meeting was cold and clear. The clubhouse, the same room where David had been humiliated just weeks before, was now packed. Nearly 100 homeowners had turned out, drawn by the promise of free coffee donuts and the simmering drama that had been whispering its way through the neighborhood. David sat near the back with Elena and Frank, a slim USB drive in his pocket. Elena, looking stronger than she had in months, gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. Frank looked like a kid on Christmas morning. The meeting droned on through the usual business: the treasurer's report, the landscaping committee update presented by Carol, with a glowing endorsement of Vanscape's work, and old business. David listened patiently. He had followed procedure, registering for one of the 5-minute homeowner speaking slots at the end of the agenda. Finally, Carol Vance, presiding with her usual serene authority, announced, "We now move to the homeowner forum. Each speaker will have 5 minutes. The time will be kept strictly. First on the list is David Henderson." A low murmur went through the room. David walked to the lectern. On the large projector screen behind the board, the management company representative clicked a button. A digital timer appeared, its large green numbers stark against the white background. 5 wak. It began to count down. David took a breath. He was not a natural public speaker, but as an architect, he was a master of presenting complex information clearly and logically. He looked out at the faces of his neighbors, some hostile, some curious, most simply weary and wanting the meeting to be over. He had to win them over, not with emotion, but with undeniable fact. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and measured. He plugged the USB drive into the laptop at the lectern. "My name is David Henderson, and I live at 1287 Chestnut Lane. For the past 6 weeks, my family has been subjected to a series of escalating fines and legal threats from this board over a gazebo on my property. The board claims it violates Section 8.4.2 of our CC&Rs. The clock read 04:40. He clicked the remote. The first slide appeared on the screen. It showed 2 columns of text side by side. On the left, David said, using a laser pointer, is the clause I am accused of violating the vague and subjective rule about preserving view corridors. On the right is Section 5.1.1, which guarantees all of us the right to improve our private property subject only to specific and enumerated restrictions. State law and legal precedent are clear. Specific rights always supersede vague aesthetic clauses." The clock read 4:10. A few people in the audience were nodding. He clicked to the next slide. It was a high-resolution scan of the official county plat map. The board's entire case rests on the existence of a principal view corridor over my property. This is not a sales brochure. This is the legally binding document for Pine Ridge Estates on file at the county recorder's office. His laser pointer traced the boundary of his lot. As you can see, there is no scenic easement. There is no designated view corridor. There are utility easements and setback lines, all clearly marked. But the restriction that this board has used to levy thousands of dollars in fines against my family simply does not exist. It is a legal fiction. A louder murmur swept the room. People were leaning forward, squinting at the map. The clock read 2:55. "This raises the question," David continued, his voice hardening slightly. "If the violation isn't real, what is this truly about? To answer that, we need to look at the association's own records." He clicked again. A page from the HOA meeting minutes appeared, a large section blacked out with a digital redaction box. "This is a page from the minutes provided to me by the management company." He clicked once more. The same page appeared next to it, but this time the text was fully visible. The redaction was gone. Gasps rippled through the audience. "And this," David announced, "is the unredacted original, provided to me by a former board member who resigned in protest over what you are about to see." The clock read Jiao 1:30. He highlighted the now visible text. It detailed a motion made by Carol Vance to approve a $5,000 common area enhancement project with Vance-scape landscaping. The project was described as the installation of a stone retaining wall and decorative plantings. $50,000 of our money, David said, letting the number sink in. And where was this project located? The minutes are very specific. His final click brought up the plat map again. This time a small, highlighted red box appeared on the patch of common land directly between his property and Carol's. The exact patch of land his gazebo partially screened from her view. The clock showed 145. This was never about a view corridor for the community, David said, his voice ringing with quiet, cold fury, as he turned to face the board. He looked directly at Carol. This was about using our money to build a $50,000 landscaping feature that would primarily benefit the view from one home. It was about manufacturing a violation to bully a homeowner whose new gazebo was in the way. And it was about funneling our mandatory association dues into a contract with the board president's own family. The clock hit. This is not governance. It is a textbook case of self-dealing conflicts of interest and fraud. The timer vanished from the screen, replaced by the HOA logo. For a moment, there was absolute stunned silence. Then, the room erupted. Akasiti. The chaos was immediate and overwhelming. Shouts erupted from every corner of the room. A vote of no confidence, someone yelled from the back. I want to see the unredacted minutes for the whole year, another voice demanded. Mark Renshaw, the board treasurer, looked pale, his face a mask of shock and fear. The other board members were in disarray, whispering frantically among themselves, refusing to look at Carol. The representative from Sterling Properties, a flustered woman named Ms. Albright, stepped to the microphone. The homeowner forum is now closed. If we can please maintain order, we need to move to adjourn the meeting. She was drowned out by a chorus of angry objections. Frank Mueller stood up, his booming voice cutting through the noise. Point of order, Madam President. A motion has been made from the floor for a vote of no confidence in the President. According to Robert's Rules of Order, that motion must be recognized. Carol Vance sat frozen behind the table, her placid mask finally shattered. For the first time, David saw a flicker of genuine panic in her eyes. The authority she had wielded for years had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. The room was no longer hers to command. A homeowner David recognized as a lawyer stood and addressed the room. I second the motion for a vote of no confidence. And I make a new motion that the board immediately authorize a full independent financial audit of this association's books for the past 5 years to be conducted by a firm with no prior relationship to this HOA or its management company. Seconded came a dozen replies at once. Ms. Albright tried again to regain control, tapping the microphone nervously. These motions are out of order. They were not on the published agenda. The agenda doesn't matter when there are credible allegations of fraud, the lawyer retorted, and the room roared its approval. The community had turned. The homeowners, once passive and deferential, were now an angry, unified body, demanding accountability. They had been shown proof, clear, documented, and undeniable, that they had been lied to, and that their money had been misused. The procedural weapons Carol had used against David were now being turned against her with a righteous fury. Seeing the tide had irrevocably turned against her, Carol stood abruptly. With a final withering glare at David, she gathered her papers and swept out of the room through a side door, leaving her stunned board and the furious community behind. Her exit was not one of power, but of retreat. The Queen had abandoned her collapsing castle. In her absence, the remaining board members, led by the junior member who had seen David pay Mrs. Gable's fine, had no choice but to yield to the will of the homeowners. They voted shakily but unanimously to approve the motion for an independent audit and to schedule a special meeting for the sole purpose of holding a recall vote for the entire board. The revolution had been swift, bloodless, and brutally effective. In the weeks that followed, the old power structure of Pine Ridge Estates was systematically dismantled. An interim board was appointed, with Frank Mueller reluctantly agreeing to serve as an advisor to a newly formed Transparency and Oversight Committee. The first act of the new board was to send David a formal written apology. The letter officially rescinded all violations and fines against him and expunged the matter from his record. The independent audit, when its results were published in the community newsletter, was even more damning than David's presentation had revealed. It confirmed that Carol Vance had been receiving direct kickbacks from her brother-in-law's company for years, disguised as consulting fees. The total amount of misappropriated funds exceeded $200,000. The matter was turned over to the district attorney's office. Carol and her husband sold their house at a loss and moved out of state before charges could be filed their suburban reign, ending not with a bang, but with a moving van in the dead of night. Sterling Properties was fired, and a new, more transparent management company was hired. One bright Saturday morning, a month after the annual meeting, David walked over to Mrs. Gable's house. He found her in the garden, a broad smile on her face, carefully unwrapping her gnomes from their newspaper cocoons. "I heard the news," she said, her eyes twinkling. "The old board is out, and the new board has rescinded all of those silly violations. All of them." David knelt down and helped her place her favorite gnome, a cheerful fellow with a fishing rod, back amongst the petunias. From a hook by her door, a set of bamboo wind chimes stirred in the breeze, their gentle hollow notes, a peaceful counterpoint to the chirping of the birds. He looked back toward his own yard. The gazebo stood proud and serene among the birch trees, bathed in the morning light. It was no longer a symbol of defiance. It was a testament to the quiet, unyielding power of principled integrity. It was the sanctuary he had meant it to be all along. Elena was sitting inside a book, open in her lap, watching him with a warm, peaceful smile. She was getting stronger every day. The community had healed scarred, but wiser. The fight had cost David his peace for a time, but it had purchased something far more valuable for everyone: a neighborhood where the rules served the community, not the other way around. He had set out to build a small shelter for his wife, and had ended up rebuilding the foundation of his entire community. And in the quiet satisfaction of that morning, listening to the gentle music of Mrs. Gable's wind chimes, he knew the fight had been worth it.